Welcome to another episode of Political Dregs. I'm Calvin, with me is Amir, Joel and Hamish as per usual. How are you doing, guys?
Hi Calvin, good, yeah.
So we put out a podcast for the first time in 2 months, and we nicely got retweeted by Piers Morgan after Amir was bringing him up as the official opposition to the government. That was nice. Got a bit bit of Twitter attention there.
Yeah, we're famous now.
Of all the videos to go to get some traction, it has to be me defending the leader of the Labour Party.
You do,
and burping apparently.
He's your local MP, isn't he?
Nearly. I'm just on the other side.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It was very flattering for Piers to retweet us. Nice of him to do so. I did invite Susanna Reid on. I did invite Andy Peters,
yes,
and Laura Tobin. So I tried to get the full spectrum of our fan base. They haven't come back to us yet, but they're very welcome to come on anytime. But no, I think it was more really interesting to see this ongoing debate that's going on in the country about whether Piers really is literally the voice of the opposition and why that is. And just speaks to a wider point about, I think, people who have taken very firm views about the government's response to this, and everyone seems to be in very entrenched camps, actually pretty much as they've been since the referendum, actually. People seem to be, regardless of the facts or the evidence, in one camp or the other, and we've seen that with views about schools as well now, where parents are deciding just without any evidence at all that it's now not safe for their children to go back to school, purely because the government are saying that it is safe. And I think that's the kind of divisive world that we're in now. It might be a permanent feature of politics.
So we have those that trust the government and those that don't trust the government. Yeah,
I mean, it seems to be going on and on like that. And people are just in very, very stringent camps now. Luckily, we're not, but only one of us is actually. But it seems to be a feature of politics now.
Well, what I've seen on that note, Joel, is what I found interesting about that is the different camps aren't party political. So most of the government bashers, as far as I've seen, have been the libertarian right. The ideological right wing of the Tory party, who are quite rightly concerned about their liberties and their freedoms, but are completely on the other end of the spectrum in saying, everything the government's doing is totalitarian, authoritarian, and completely wrong. And that's been interesting to me. It's not necessarily been Labour or the Lib Dems that have been bashing them.
They are as well. I mean, there's chances of there's chancellors who are just virulently anti-government, disingenuous. And then there's also, of course, we have the nationalists. We see today, ridiculous wee Jimmy Cranky has decided to announce the SNP's the SNP, not Scotland, because the SNP apparently is Scotland. They've announced that a lockdown exit plan that's remarkably similar to Boris's own.
Let me guess, it's a week later.
Yeah, and it's just pathetic. I mean, I'm so sick of. And why do people on the left who despise nationalism in every other form applaud it when it comes from Scotland against Britain? It's just a bizarre
devolution. Was clearly a mistake, wasn't it?
That's the key thing, isn't it? It's against Britain.
Yeah, but what why is that? So that seems to have been another factor, and a sort of an ongoing theme is the attack on the union generally, and we're seeing that sort of amplified by the current pandemic.
Yeah.
Is the SNP using this crisis to go it alone? And
of course they are. Yeah, that's so transparent.
I mean, this is a real danger, because obviously none of us here want the breakup of our union, and this actually, to be honest with you, I feel that this is 100% the responsibility of our current government. They have allowed this to happen. And this goes back to what we were saying before, Hamish, even though you strongly and vehemently disagreed with me. A unity government would have solved this problem, because had you had brought in Nicola Sturgeon and the Northern Irish, whoever, and Wales, whoever, into the government, then
What's been
it
in
would
your
be
shisha pipe today?
It would have
then?
been collective responsibility. You couldn't then have this and that and this this person's doing that, this person's doing that.
Everyone would have quite understand what you're saying.
I'm saying, that the government, by not acting to bring in people who are in opposition to the table to make decisions which affect us all. Like, we have a crisis, and we have to attack this crisis as a whole country.
Well, so just in terms of planning and things, it seems pretty clear to me that the Scottish government and the Welsh and the Northern Irish have been part of the sort of Cobra briefings. In terms of Westminster, I think the Labour Party have had briefings on the issue, but I don't quite see why you think that this sort of crisis is ripe for a unity government, whereas, say, foot and mouth isn't. I mean, where do you draw the line? The government was elected to govern this country through thick and thin.
I mean, this is war, Hamish. We're in war.
It's not war.
It is war. It is war. It is war. The virus. You could arguably say the virus is an alien. It's invaded the world. An invisible force has attacked our planet. Okay, and we're at war. You can't deny it.
I can deny it because
people are dying. What are you talking about? More people are dying now than in Afghanistan, than in Iraq, than in.
But that's not the definition of war, is it? People die every day from crossing the road. That doesn't mean we're at war with cause. It's a ridiculous statement.
Yeah, plenty of people die of cancer.
Well, Trump said it.
Of other illnesses, of other viruses and diseases. I mean, malaria has killed, in its history, huge numbers of people.
Okay, so maybe it's not war in the conventional sense.
Amir, stop. Tuberculosis still kills loads of people, but we don't stop and have a unity government because of that. Yes, there's a virus that we are trying to deal with. I think war is a bit of a weird analogy, but we're in a public health crisis, absolutely. But that's not an excuse for a unity government.
We also don't have a partner who, in the war, the Second World War, we had a leader of the Labour Party who was prepared to act in the national interest against the common enemy. We absolutely don't have that in Sir Keir. He's extremely disingenuous and highly partisan. If we did have a leader of the Labour Party who was anything like Clement Attlee, then possibly you would consider that it might be a good idea to have him on board. But they're clearly talking at cross purposes. Everything that Sir Keir does is designed to be party political, as far as I can see. I see right through him. I really don't like his approach, and ever since his manoeuvrings on Brexit, frankly, and of course his campaigning with a Jewish wife, he campaigned to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. I mean, that is just disgusting. So for me, he's a complete coward, and I don't think we should ever forget that. And his manoeuvring since then have been highly disingenuous. So he's not a viable partner. It would be like and putting wee Jimmy Krankie in the National Unity Government is just a complete contradiction in terms, because she doesn't believe in the country at all. She doesn't want to be part of the country. That's my problem with the SNP. They keep sniping from the sidelines about the UK when they don't even want to be in it anyway. So if we had some viable partners, maybe Ed Davey, let's try and be fair, maybe Ed Davey has the country's interests at heart. I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. But until we have a sort of consensus in our leadership, it's not, and it's less polarized, as I said earlier, we're nowhere near having that sort of national unity approach, which has its merits. You're right, Amir. It might be, there might be some benefits in that, but we're just not seeing that. We're seeing different sides of the argument based on your view of the government and based on, frankly, other identity politics.
I mean,
viewpoints, which Calvin has said earlier.
Yeah,
I think it's awful. It's an awful crisis that we're in, but we have elected a government to take us through the next few years. I think it'd be really weird, really odd to take the Labour Party into power in any way, shape or form when the country has spoken quite clearly, very recently, that they want the Conservative Party to govern the country and not the Labour Party or the Lib Dems. I think a unity government would be a very, very strange move to do. But I think what you're actually referring to, Amir, taking your history on board, is that you just don't like our voting system and our governing system. I think what you're looking at is something more like what they have in Germany, in the Bundestag, with the, not PR, whatever it is that they call it. I think that's the kind of thing that you'd prefer, and I think you'd prefer their voting system over first past the post as well. But we don't have any of those elements, so it just doesn't make sense in our context.
Yeah, I mean, it may not make sense, but we're creating more problems by not addressing problems. So I'm talking about fire preventing. I'm not talking about firefighting, and this seems to be a repetitive methodology of this government, where it waits for things to happen and then it tries to solve the problem after the fact. Well, what I'm looking at is looking forward and going, okay, wait, this is a potential problem. The union collapsing is a potential problem. And now we're looking at ways of preventing that from happening. Now, you could argue and say, no, we have the democratic mandate, we've been elected with this landslide majority, and therefore whoever it is up north or in Wales or wherever, they have to just submit to our will. And I'm not talking about that. That's fair. That's fine. That's just the way our democracy is at the moment. But I'm talking about.
It's not even like that at the moment. That doesn't make any sense what you just said.
I'm talking about fire preventing.
I also don't think that a public health crisis on the scale of COVID-19 is the right time to sort of experiment in your slightly odd ways of doing government in this country. I don't think anyone.
You're saying unity is odd. I don't.
No, I think your sort of slightly odd way of trying to save the union, which basically means a minority of voters have, a say of who's in government. That might work, but I don't think this is the right time for it. Maybe. And actually, I think if you're a reasonably level-headed individual, I don't think you can accuse the government of making party political decisions during this crisis. I think they have obviously made mistakes, but they seem to have been guided by the scientific and medical advisors that they have. They have taken decisions, I think, in the interests of the country, in good faith. No doubt there have been mistakes. Clearly, care homes, there have been mistakes. Clearly, there's a debate about whether this lockdown was the right approach to take, and there is sort of
universal credit.
But what we're not. Sure, but actually,
universal credit's been massively expanded. Half the country's on universal credit now.
But I don't think you could say they've been taking an ideological sort of approach. They've done what they think is best on the advice they've got. Yeah, and no doubt we will have an inquiry, and all of these things will be combed over and looked at. But unless you have really specific criticisms about things, which I'm not hearing from you at the moment, Amir.
No, I have criticisms. I just think that I'm just saying forward in time. And look, the Scottish National Party are obviously using this as a way of forcing their will through. They're trying to hijack this crisis with what they want. Right?
But of course, the interesting thing is they're not really doing anything very different. They're doing a lot of.
Not yet.
Not yet. But they're doing a lot of posturing about, well, we're not coming out of lockdown, and then they can sort of, do exactly the same things. But I think what I want to go back to something that Calvin said, which was really interesting, was that actually there's a lot of people who are more cautious than the government. We're seeing that in the teaching unions. We're seeing that with parents who don't want their kids to go back to school, and people who are just not out and about. Very few people are sort of taking the approach of, well, this isn't really that big of a deal. The sort of either the slightly deluded, Trump types who don't really believe the virus exists. So what is it? Why have we got into become sort of nation of namby-pamby, lily-livered, cowards, and we're all carrying in our home of this? Where is that sort of slightly misplaced sense of British adventurism? People thinking we can go and give the virus a good old biffing, and go back to our restaurants and our pubs.
Maybe we're more sensible than you give us credit for, Hamish.
I watched a video today of Copenhagen, and it was like being on another planet. I saw the musical, I think it was BBC actually. He was talking about the pubs were packed, the people out on the terraces, the coffee shop, everyone was out enjoying life.
But
And actually,
when are we going to go out again? When are we all going to do it? What? No, but like, what would it take for you to go and do it?
well, London had no infections yesterday, so I mean,
Yeah, it didn't. And why is it? We should really be thinking about that instead of our ridiculous mayor bleating about the government. Why do we not have a mayor who's championing London and lobbying for the lockdown to be ended here earlier? We literally have had no infections. We have the economy is on its knees. People are flouting the lockdown anyway. The parks are completely packed. Let's have a plan to get our hospitality industry going again. I mean, the sooner the better, I think. And we need to protect our vulnerable. There are still a number of people who, whatever the reason, won't come out, as Hamish said. But I think there are a lot of people who are willing and able to be productive again. And those are the people that we need to be facilitating. I don't understand. But it's sad the way that so many people have been cowered into submission by this. But the attitude, as I said, the disingenuous attitude of many of our politicians hasn't helped, and their desire to put one over on the Tory government wherever possible, and I think that's the consequences of that, especially for our children, of course, are far-reaching. I maintain my view that the unions have been an absolute disgrace in trying to stymie children's education. I know you don't think that they're there for childcare, but just for Calvin. But in terms of providing an education, there's a generation of youngsters who are going to be left behind as a result, frankly, of left-wing unions scoring political points. I mean, there are some really awfully cynical things going on here, and it's the most vulnerable who are going to suffer from it for a long time.
Yeah, I think you're right on some elements, but I just think Joel and Hamish are both saying this whole thing about people are cowering and what's wrong with the British people. We're following sensible advice from the government backed by the scientific community. I think people are ready now to start going back to work and to start a phased integration or reintegration into society. But I think people have been, in general, following the advice of the government. It's been very sound advice. I don't think that the British public are cowards in any way. I think we've done the right thing, looking at people are dying all over the world from this, and we didn't want it to happen here.
Well, no, you make a fair point. What I worry about is that when the government advice changes and they say, go back to school, you can go to a restaurant, you can go to a non-food shop, that people will not do that because they have a residual sense of concern. We've seen that there are only about 2% of kids in schools during the lockdown, when I think about 20% of kids would be entitled to be in schools because of their parents' key worker status. Now that's quite an amazing statistic, really. It's showing that the number of people are keeping their kids out of school when there's really no scientific evidence that schools, the kids pass it on or get infected by it.
Not now, but at that phase, people were waiting for the research and the evidence. And I think to have sent your child to school at that point, when everyone else's children were kept out of school, that would have been a major risk. And that would have been, why are my children able to be sacrificed so that I can get into work in my hospital or whatever it is that I do as a key worker, when other people's children can't?
Yes, I think then yes, but the situation has definitely changed now. We have literally 0 infections in London. The number of deaths has clearly gone down. Care homes remains an issue, and that's possibly something that needs to be addressed on a national unity basis, on a cross-party basis. Sadly lacking at the moment, but that definitely is something that needs to be addressed more generally. But I find it amazing. Anecdotally, I speak to other parents, sensible, I thought, parents who are still saying that they don't want to send their children back to school because they haven't seen the evidence that it is safe. So, that kind of ideology is now taking hold, where people want to see evidence that something is 100% safe before they contemplate it. And this was
nothing
something
is 100% safe.
They just need reassuring, don't they? The government messaging needs to shift now into reassurance and encouraging people that it is okay to send your children back to school. And these are the reasons why. I don't think people need to be 100% convinced, but people do need some reassurance.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that they clearly they really G'd up the stay-at-home, save lives messaging on the basis. Yeah, absolutely. It worked almost too well. You know, on the basis everyone thought, the buccaneering Brits won't do any of that, and we went into sort of uber lockdown, and it's sort of gone through the other side.
But you guys are so gung ho. It's not going to happen like that overnight. We have to be gradual about this process of, like I say, reintroducing ourselves to society. We can't expect everyone to just instantly flip that switch of being alert and staying at home and being cautious all the time to automatically going, okay, we're back to normal. It needs to be step by step.
I think you're enjoying lockdown too much.
I've literally been the one bloody in the press all week telling people that we need to get back out of lockdown and get into schools. So I don't think that argument's going to work. But on that note, we had a comment on our channel from One Adopted Geordie, one of our long-time viewers. Thank you, One Adopted Geordie. And he said the only topic I would add to is that the religious building being closed to the public. It is utterly appalling that this has been allowed to happen. So this is an argument that I haven't made so far, because I mentioned last week that I was involved in the debate to allow clergy back into their church buildings, but what I haven't been involved in is the debate about the congregation, the parishioners being allowed in their church buildings. And this is the one that's going to come to the forefront in the next few days and weeks, is that if shops are allowed to start to reopen and all kinds of amenities are allowed to start to reopen, and even if they weren't, the ones that are classed as essential have been allowed to stay open this whole time, it should be that a person's place of worship is considered essential because it is for their spiritual well-being, just as a supermarket is essential for their physical well-being. So this is a very, very interesting one for me. Joel, I can see you nodding. Have you got 2 pence to add to this?
I have a few shekels to add. Yes, I totally agree. The last time I checked, we were living in a Christian country, actually. Obviously, I'm a Jew, but I fully respect that. And I find it extraordinary the way that the Church of England is so defeatist in its approach, almost apologetic about the fact that this is a Christian established country. I've never really understood that. And places of worship play a crucial role in people's lives. So I respect that. And basically the settlement is that in exchange for living in this country, you accept the fact that you accept and embrace the fact that there is a Christian established church, which is extremely tolerant to all other faiths and none. And that is the settlement of this country. That's the particular settlement of the UK. Personally, I love that. But I just find it very strange that it's not promoted more, and that the Church of England, as I said, seems so defeatist all the time. I would find it very frustrating were I a member of the Church of England to see it constantly ceding ground. And this would be a great example. Yeah, why? If people find great solace in churches, why would you not try to facilitate that if at all possible? It's great for spiritual health, great for mental health. I would. I hope, Calvin, that you can lobby your friend Archbishop Welby, who seems to be at the forefront of making the church more and more apologetic, to make it a little bit more proud of itself.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, there's we could advocate for social distancing in church so people can go in for private prayer. I'm not talking about full masses with everyone next to each other. There's lots of measures we can take before getting back to that stage. I think it's absolutely disgraceful that we're
not churches are empty,
considering
aren't they?
it yet.
They've got the space.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It would help a lot of people, I think.
There was some concern, I think, at the beginning of this sort of coronavirus coming to the UK, that places of worship, churches, synagogues, and other temples and mosques were the hubs of super spreading, and there was some of that concern. But I think in circumstances where the members of Parliament are coming back to Westminster with social distancing in place, I don't think there should be a particular problem with having a religious service where there's social distancing in place. in the same way that actually I don't think I think it's time for non-essential shops to be allowed to open again. We do actually need to get back to some level of normality just in terms of our activity. We're going to have to change the way that we go about our lives. We have to learn to live with this virus to some extent, because none of you answered the question I asked, which is what would it take for you to go out and do X, Y, and Z? Well, the problem is, the vaccine may never come, the cure may never come, but we do have to live our lives. And every day that the government is essentially paying people to stay at home, and the government is giving out huge tax breaks or stimulus packages to private enterprise, that has to be paid for. And that has to be paid for either in increased tax, decreased spending, or servicing debt for years to come. It's absolutely the right thing to have done. I don't want to see anyone having to go unemployed because of this, or lose their business, or suffer. But it's been almost 3 months, and the bill is going to be enormous. It's going to blow our minds. So we kind of need to get on with it. And the other thing, and whilst I'm moaning about public finances, which is one of my favourite activities, I noticed that the government has today announced that it has abandoned its opposition to something that the new Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, was calling for, which is immigrant people who are not British who work in the NHS.
Well, let's pause that because we can come back to that. Let's get everyone to answer your question first, because I thought it was a very good question about what would it take for you to get back out into normality. And I assume you already are, Amir.
Well, I mean, I've got businesses, so my business has never closed down. I've got a couple of laundrettes, so I still.
What would it take to go out to the pub? Would you go if the pubs were open tomorrow?
Well, it's supply side. They need to be open. They're not open. Yeah, they were open.
Interestingly enough, today I was passing by. I was going through Hammersmith, and there was a pub that was open, but they were serving beer for takeaway in plastic cups. So, I mean, there are ways around it where people can go and grab a beer, go to the park with their mates. I don't know if that's allowed, but I mean, I think we need to adapt. Like you said, Hamish, we need to just get back to it and adapt. The problem is, and this is the problem is second wave. How do we avoid second wave? Is the government's policy or proposed policy of a 2-week self-imposed quarantine for people traveling to the UK, is that tenable? I don't think so. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to cripple the economy even more, because we rely a large portion of we rely on people coming to this country and doing business and being tourists. Personally, I think we need to get that test, that 20-minute test. They were talking about it today, that it could be ready in 6 weeks' time. I don't know why it's taking so long in this country, because in America they already have a 5-minute test. I saw President Trump do an example in one of his press briefings a few weeks ago. It's not a recent thing. So for me, I think the way through this is that all of our ports of entry become test zones, and fast test zones, organized, orderly, but very fast test zones, so that if you do leave or enter this country, you'll get tested, mandatory. And that way...
But Amir, the disease is already here.
Right.
Here. Coronavirus is already in the UK.
Let's hear what Joel's stance on this is.
Well, what would make me get out again? Well, I mean, I already am as much as possible. I'm quite restless anyway, and I've got a screaming toddler at home. So, I try to get out, occasionally.
You're not socialising, are you?
No, I'm going for runs in the park, slow runs. And the tennis club has reopened, thankfully, for singles. But no, it's supply side. Look, if the restaurants were starting to open, if there was a plan, then places to go, then I would go. But look, like a couple of you on this show, I called for the airports travel to be shut down earlier back in January, which it should have been. now is actually too late to do it, because like Amir says, it will have too much of a knock-on effect on the economy. But we should, and the recovery, so it's actually they're too slow to do it now. We should have done it a lot earlier, and we should have banned flights from China completely, but we weren't prepared to do that. But we should be looking at providing places for people to go and sensible measures. I mean, that even the vaccine, even the testing. Sorry, I don't really buy into that, because if you get a test and you're negative, you can get it, the next hour anyway.
It's about getting through this crisis is about continuous, repetitive testing. So I might get tested every week for the next however long it takes for this virus to just disappear. And I think we as a country should be prepared to test every single person in this country repetitively, so we can deal with this virus and knock it on its head. The way, the amount of money we're spending by furloughing and by bailing companies out, etc., we could just invest that in testing people.
But haven't we shown that we have the capacity to deal with a second outbreak, because the NHS was not overwhelmed by the first outbreak? So haven't we actually shown by the way that we built up?
It's about saving lives. It's about...
Yeah, well, that will save lives. Don't we show we have that safety net? I mean, we've shown.
So we'd have to go back into a lockdown, is what you're saying?
Because there was a model that was published today. They said that if the lockdown had happened 1 week earlier, then it's possible that 75% of the deaths could have been avoided.
Yeah, that should have happened. So
hindsight's a fantastic thing, though, isn't it? From my perspective, what would get me back out socialising and back to normality would be not the test to see if you've got the virus. The test they've just released, the antibody test, is the interesting one. Now, if they can show you that you have immunity and that works for so long, that'd be fantastic. I've got, without going into anyone's personal details, I've got a member of my immediate family who has underlying health conditions. Now, I've been self-isolating, not social distancing, for a long while now. I started self-isolating a week before lockdown, so that I can support my family member with underlying health conditions. I am quite confident and quite comfortable going to spend time with that person now, because I've been isolating and they have. And I can take food around, I can, be with that person so they're not completely on their own. But if I could have, or if they could have, the test that shows your antibodies, and that test confirms that you're immune for a certain period of time, that would release a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety in that. Because I could either choose to spend time with that person or go back into society and never see that person until they're safe to return to society. You see what I'm saying? So it's a difficult balance there.
But the danger there is that they still don't know if that antibody, the antibodies.
Can you trust that 100%?
So the antibody test works, as in it doesn't give false positives, but we don't know if because you have the antibodies, you're immune. That's the problem. We don't know yet.
We don't know. No.
But that's a piece of information I think we will get a lot faster than a vaccine.
Well, the vaccine, look, let's just be realistic. We haven't got an HIV vaccine. That's been 40 years. None of the coronaviruses, we don't have a vaccine for any of them.
Did people really care this much about HIV, though?
We don't have a vaccine for SARS or MERS or any of the coronaviruses.
But we do have vaccines for other flus, and people die of those as well. So, that is back to the original.
No.
You're not being realistic about the vaccine.
Influenza is different, right? The flu jab that you get every year is a guess on what the current the New Year's strain is going to be. It's not designed with that strain in mind, because it has to be ready for that winter. So
it's not realistic.
But there are some very interesting noises being made by clinical trials in the United States and in Oxford. Who knows? But equally, that's still going to take some time, and we don't have that sort of time to be locked down. I think Calvin points out a really, really good, as it were, example of a very difficult situation that people can be put in without knowing. And I think the answer probably is huge testing, repetitive testing. But I just don't, unless you're doing it on a scale that is really meaningful, then I think the government's sort of option that it's picked of test, track and trace is probably the only one that's potentially going to work, because unfortunately you can't there's just no way that they're going to be able to test 60 million people once a week.
Why?
They don't have the infrastructure or
people
the ability
refuse to do it, but you get Yeah, I mean, I think
people-
building confidence is good. I mean, if Calvin can have more confidence from those tests, but it's never going to give you the full answer. It's just going to build your confidence. And
we have to get our country back to normal. And the fastest, the quickest way of getting it back to normal is to get rid of the virus from our shores, and prevent it coming back into our shores, because then people are going to be able to freely go to the supermarket and not worry about social distancing. You're talking about
the debate we're having is the debate we're having is what the realistic options to do that.
Okay, but let's talk about realistic options, yes, but you're talking about the social distances, which is going to continue for the next however long, 6 months or a year, possibly even longer. The high street isn't going to survive that. Businesses now who've been furloughed, and they're surviving because of the furlough, the 80% employee cost being paid by HMRC, they're not going to survive because they're not going to have the footfall through their doors to pay for the bills when everything goes back to normal. Because the reality is that, people are going to go back to the bars, they're going to go back to the restaurants, they're going to go back to the cafes.
Yeah, how are restaurants going to turn a profit when they're only allowed to have 50 or
25% of the client base?
No, I agree. I completely agree, Amir. But the problem is, and I agree with you that from my non-expert point of view, it seems like the way out of it would be to test everyone once a week. But it's just not. There's not going to happen.
Why not?
And what are the consequences of those tests, Hamish? What happens if you?
Sorry?
What are the consequences of those tests? So if we did have enforced testing once a week, would you have to say, actually, you're not allowed back to work because you've proven positive, or?
Yeah, you'd go into
self-isolation.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
So what would we do if people refuse to either get tested or refuse to stay at home?
Well, exactly. It would be. It's not a pretty option.
It sounds very Chinese.
Well, no, but I mean, under the Coronavirus Act that passed just to implement lockdown, the police are able to arrest you if you're presenting symptoms and you're not going home.
Well, what do we think?
That is the way to get this country domestically back to normal.
What do we think about the app?
I'm not downloading it.
Haven't downloaded it.
Having just said that test, track, and trace is the best way forward.
See, this is it. Pragmatically, it makes sense to me. It makes very much sense that we should be tracking everyone's. But the libertarian side of me just can't. I can't get my head around giving this much information, this much data to the government.
Not the tracking side, but the testing side is fine. If they can send a letter to every person in this country about staying at home, they can send everyone. You can get it now. Like if you want to get STD tested, you just go online. You do a quick questionnaire. 2 days later, you get a little package with a little pinprick. You drop your blood in a little container. You seal it.
Is that what they're doing because of Corona, or is that how it's always been?
That's just with STD tests now. is very efficient and it's all online.
I like how Amir is telling us this as if anyone else has had cause to take such a test.
No, because you've got STD clinics and people traditionally would go to an STD clinic.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a very celibate person.
This is it. I think this is a sign of the sorry state of affairs that this country's in, that it has to be such a readily accessible thing to get an STD check.
Oh my God, don't.
Well, look, to have everyone tested.
If people lived more moral lives, we wouldn't need them.
I'm talking about something that works, that can happen. We just have to scale it up so that everyone can have access. They just go online, they fill in a quick...
Everyone now who wants to be tested for this can get tested for it.
Yeah, so
there is no doubt. You can now have a test for coronavirus if you want one.
The testing only works if you're testing basically everyone once a week.
Exactly. That's how we should get through this.
At the moment,
it's not possible.
To do that for a virus that has got whatever it is, less than 1% death rate and a 0.1% death rate for anyone under the age of 60 is very difficult to justify.
The economic justification makes it viable because as soon as we can get our economy back to the way it was, where people don't have to worry about social distancing, the sooner that we can recover, the sooner we can start paying back the debt that we've accumulated over this short period of time. Okay, if this prolongs, if this goes on 1 year, 1.5 years of this continuous social distances, businesses are going to fail. Okay, people are going to.
Well, we get the debt back by sending the bill to China, of course.
Yeah.
So, Hamish, you wanted to bring something up about the NHS.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to bring up the fact that Keir Starmer has managed to get the government to U-turn on foreign nationals who work in the NHS having to pay sort of the NHS sort of immigrant surcharge. Usually, I mean, one of the great issues that certain people on the right have had with the NHS is this idea of health tourism, or people who use the NHS when they haven't necessarily had a history of paying into it. So one of the things that the government does to combat that is to say, if you to impose a surcharge on foreign nationals, immigrants. Keir Starmer has decided this is terribly unfair and very sad, and because these people work in the NHS, they shouldn't have to pay the surcharge.
Well, that's fair enough, because they are paying in by serving the NHS.
And taxes.
Well, indeed, I mean, are they? I mean, that's just, are they paying in by working for the NHS? Well, no. What they're getting in return for working in the NHS is a salary.
Yeah, recompensed, but yeah, they're still serving the NHS, which is serving the British people. So I have a problem with that. I don't see that as particularly left wing.
No, I do have a problem. I have two problems. First of all, it's just opening out another hole in the budget, and where's the money coming from to fill that hole? And second of all, actually, I do think that we need to view the National Health Service as a national service, and if you come here to work, that's great, but I don't have a particular issue with there being a particular level of charge for an initial period for you to use those services.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
that's now being reversed if you happen to work in the NHS.
Yeah.
It's part of the fetishization of the NHS that's occurred after Boris's supposed near-death experience, and the chickens are coming home to roost for the government on this. I think once you've decided that the NHS is inviolable, which the Conservatives have done, only not great outcomes politically can come for the government from this, because the agenda is ceded to the government's opponents, Sir Keir and the Labour Party. And I don't see how the government will end up getting much credit for this. If they think they're going to be seen as, really benevolent as a result of this, then I think they're very mistaken. Yes, it's great that we have immigrant workers who come and work for the NHS, but they're coming to do a job that they get paid for, and as a result, they live in this country. So I don't see why you should have a different set of rules for people just because they work in the NHS. It's making a deity of the NHS, which is a great institution. I do support it, but it's not immune from criticism, and this is another part of this sort of narrative that's built up as a result of Boris's condition and other factors with this crisis that I don't think are going to end up.
Wait a second, I'm a bit confused. Wait, so you're saying are we talking about legal immigrants or illegal? We're talking about legal immigrants.
Legal immigrants, yeah.
So legal immigrants who come to this country, they're contributing to the economy of this country by working, by bringing money for their rent payments, etc. You need a large sum of money to be able to come into this country legally. You can't just come with empty pockets. It's just not.
No, I mean, I think if you're recruited as a...
You can't just come with empty pockets. You need to come with some kind of background or backstanding. Okay, the point is that they are contributing to our economy. They are paying for the NHS by being here and working and contributing, partaking in our society. I don't see why any legal immigrant should pay extra to have access to the NHS. I don't think you need to build that up. That doesn't make any sense to me. Children don't need to build it up. Children don't work. They get everything for free until the age of, 16, 18. So should they suddenly now start to pay up some kind of dividend so that they can withdraw it?
You start off with a good argument and then it just goes loopy. I don't know what this thing about children is. But there's nothing wrong with, but you're all right. All of you are right. There's nothing wrong with saying that if you come into this country, you should have to pay in for a while before you get the benefits. But also at the same time, there's nothing wrong with saying if you happen to work for the NHS, you can also claim the benefits of the NHS. I don't see a problem with either.
Well, I think there's a problem saying, like, you know, having one foreign national who is a consultant, you know, in a hospital who's earning, you know, quite a lot of money, it gets this charge waived, and then another foreign national who works, you know, as a cleaner in a school has to pay it because she doesn't.
But they might get different benefits from being in the school. They might get their child into the school or something. Like wherever you work, you get certain benefits for that different job. What's the big deal?
I don't agree with it. I don't agree with that at all. NHS should be free at the point of use, and it should be free for everyone if they're legal in this country.
Really? So it should be free for tourists then?
If they're no, but tourism.
30-day stay visa. 30-day stay visa.
No, we're talking about people here, visas to work, like visas, not holiday visas, visas for work.
What about foreign students who are here for 3 years?
Well, they contribute to our economy. They pay rent, they pay to the universities, they buy food, they pay for their groceries, they go out. I don't see why they shouldn't get access to the NHS.
I just think politically, well, because of this argument, it's not going to end well. We can see it's not going to end well for the government, because I think Amir's argument probably will end up winning this, which is that they'll end up having to waive the charge completely for everyone. It's just not a winning issue for the Conservatives.
But the NHS isn't the other thing I completely agree. But the thing is, the NHS is not free. It has to be paid for. It's either paid for by you, me, and every other taxpayer, or it's paid for by in generations to come. And the problem is, the British people do not want increased taxes. They do not. You know, the minute you cut a pound of flabby spending, people scream austerity and Tories are killing people because of public services and having people's futures are being taken away. And so you just pile on huge amounts of debt. I don't think most people in this country know how much is spent on the NHS. You know, I've occasionally taken to sort of say to some left wingers, you know, how much does the government spend a year on the NHS? And nobody knows. You know, sometimes they might think, 10 billion or something, but sometimes some people guess, people who are really, really uneducated, you know, they guess, was it £1 million? And then when they're actually told, I think the last figures available is like £130 billion.
Something like that.
They're like, well, that is clearly not enough because the doctors say it's not enough. It's like, well, of course the doctors say it. Who's ever in any positions decided they have enough funding? Thanks. Yeah,
I know. It's frustrating. I mean,
where is it coming from?
It's frustrating. Look, I am a Tory. I believe in what I thought were Conservative values, but this just seems to be another disappointing example of the government being led by forces who are not friendly to it and are never going to give Tories credit for anything. I just think it's a dangerous trap that the Tories are going into on this.
You know,
well, they went into this. The Conservatives went into this crisis with the ability to win over the public, over their historical association with the NHS, but they've kind of fluffed it up, haven't they? I mean,
there you go, exactly. So they don't get any benefit from it at all. They're just going to get further criticism, and it's.
But that's their own fault. You can't just say, "Oh, the Tories never get any credit." Well, they don't deserve the credit because look what happens.
Well, let's see what Piers Morgan has to say about all this, and I think that's a very good place to wrap this up. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we might see you on another one. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Shall we say hello to some friends of the show? The last episode, we didn't think we had any friends left, but then as soon as we got retweeted by Piers Morgan, we got a lot of comments, and a couple of people came out of the woodwork saying that we were glad they were glad we were back. So we've got some new friends and some glad old friends. I'll kick us off with a new friend who's one of the people who commented under Piers' retweet to @CalvinRoche1. Bloody hell, Will from the In-Betweeners has got a lot to say.
You do. You really do.
He really does, yeah. I'd like to give a shout out to Stephen Cox. He seems to be a fan of the show and enjoys it, so I hope he enjoyed this one. And I hope he enjoyed our little discussion on worship as well. So hi, Stephen.
He's a good guy, Stephen. I'll give a shout out to Martin Robinson, another educationalist, public speaker and author. Thank you for watching.
And I'm going to give a shout out to every single person who commented about the helicopter guy. That's me.
It's you.
This is not a helicopter hat. This is my head. And it's perpetually rotating all the way around my halo.
I have to say, the helicopter does make it quite difficult to take anything you say seriously.
That's not the helicopter, Hamish. That's his words.
The bollocks that you talk.
It's rotated through all the parties as well.
Someone actually said that. Someone did say that.
Yeah,
I think we should give an honorary shout out as well to Good Morning Britain, who were going to show our clip this morning as well. So, thank you.
But they didn't. But that's show business, It's a tough game.
I still don't even watch it.